Alrighty, here is my unwrapped project for the second week of the class. We have 4 models unwrapped here. We have a sword, a bench, a stone fence or wall I suppose, and a door. Do a little zoom in on all of these here so we can take a look at them. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how most of these turned out. There are still some areas where there's some tearing that needs to be fixed. Like here on the pommel, you can see there's some seam tear there. But overall, I think it came out looking pretty good. I'll show the process of how I made these textures here in a minute. The fence here is a little odd with how I had to get it to unwrap to make it work properly, so it would be seamless where it needs to be, but might need to come back to it later in the future and redo it a bit. But for now it works. And then we have the door here, which I think I like this one the most. I think this turned out really good. And I forgot to show these in the original recording, but here are the textures here. Just scroll down all these real quick. I don't know if we actually need to show these or not in the video, but might as well. And there we have it. Alrighty, whoops, wrong tab, there we go. Alrighty, so for I couldn't get a copy of Photoshop for my project. I don't know why, it just wouldn't let me get the educational version, and it didn't let me get a free trial version of it. I might have used it already. So I had to just fall back on old reliable. I'm using a program called GIMP. It's very similar to Photoshop. It can do a lot of the same stuff. So I'll just go over the process of how I made these textures. I'll start with the sword here and the handle. So for the handle, this is a tile texture I made myself, for the fabric at least. The wood underneath it is not though, however. How I did this was, GIMP has a modifier, I believe it is in here under artistic, yeah. What I did was I just created a small box, I painted it red, and then I added the clothify modifier to make it look more cloth-like. Then to kind of make it appear more like a bandage or a wrap-in, I just went over it with some light red, or dark red rather, and created these little rivets here. And when I tiled it, because I noticed that when I tiled it, these lines I created, they didn't really match up. So when it wrapped all the way around, it didn't look quite right. How I fixed that was I just took a black brush and I went over these, created some little stitch marks, kind of show that it was tied together, and I think that hides it pretty well. Then to give it some more like ancient, it's been sat there for a very long time in the scene, I just created some tears and revealed the handle underneath the fabric. And we just added a couple little strings here to give it a little bit of depth. Now for the blade, which is over here, what I did for this was I just found a metal base texture. I'll turn these off so you can see it. I took this base texture for the metal, then I kind of colored it a little bit to make it look a little more kind of new-ish, but then I added this rust modifier over it as well to make it seem like it's a little more old. It's been there for a long time. Weather's finally gotten to it a bit. And I did the same thing for the tip of the blade, which is down here. Same modifiers, same layering. And then for the guard, all I really did for this was just grabbed a bronze texture that I found on one of the free websites posted. I added a roughness layer to it that came with it. I used dissolve to just kind of make it almost like a sand grain texture. And then I just added another level of the roughness. just to colorize it a bit and make it look a little more brownish. That's all I really did for the sword. I think it came out pretty good. Well, for the main part of the sword. For the pommel, same thing with the blade. I just used a different modifier for it to make it seem a bit different. This is the metal ring. Just a metal texture. And some rust. Then for the pommel, same thing, didn't do a whole lot to this. I just took a wood texture I found, and then I applied a modifier to make it darker, because when wood gets old, it will either start to lighten or it will start to darken. Now for the bench, this is where I started to use, I guess you could kind of call it a decal, I don't know, I just kind of painted these on here though. I took a wood texture, and I added some colorization to it, made it darker, and then GIMP actually has a few brushes that come with it that you can use. It has vegetation, so what I did here was I just grabbed one of these, lowered the hardness on it a bit, lowered the size on it, and then I just painted on some moss to show that the garden that this bench will be in kind of has overtaken it a bit. And then I did the same thing for the other parts of the bench, the bars and the legs, but I changed the values of the modifiers to give it a bit more variation, and I painted the moss on in different areas. So this is the bench bar 1, 2, this one I made a bit lighter, and then 3, and I added some more moss to it to kind of show that this area had been overtaken by it first. Then we have the fence. This one was one of the more difficult ones to do. I had initially started, so this was not a tile texture originally, this is one of the ones I made. So I wasn't sure how to really tile it because the base texture was very broken up. Like there's a lot of small rocks if you look at it, so I was worried that it would be very difficult to use the selection method to sort of tile this. So I actually just played around with the clone brush a little bit, and it actually works pretty well for this actually. If you can see here, because of how this rock texture worked in the beginning, you have these sort of like cement areas in the back holding all the rocks together. So when you go over with the clone brush, they actually kind of fold into the other rocks pretty seamlessly. There's the color change, but if you have the hardness down, it starts to kind of blend with it a bit more. It creates a very nice effect. I like how it turned out. So we just used the clone modifier on this in a few places, and it worked out pretty good. You can't really see any of the seams on it anymore. Then again, just added some moss to it to show that it had been overgrown from the garden. And we just did a color change to darken the image a bit, and the moss as well. Now we're going on to the final prop, which is the door. This one had the most textures on it, or the most individual textures, I guess. So for this one, again, I just took a wood plank texture, and I added some water damage using another one of these GIMP brushes. I believe it's this one. Yes, the oils brush. And I just went through some of the cracks and crevices and painted some darker browns in there. Because when you add the weathering effect to it, which is just a brown layer that I have burned onto it, you can see that it starts to kind of show that it's almost like it's rotting away in those cracks because of water damage that has seeped in. Then I added another modifier, this one a linear burn. I think that got to a pretty nice color for the wood. It seems very old now, almost wet. And then I just went over it again with some moss using the vegetation tool again. I tried to get it around the cracks with the water damage on them. Excuse me. And then here we have my final tile texture. This is for the door handle and the hinges. All I did with this was I found another free texture. It was a metal shipping container. I just cut out the metal door on it and tiled it. And again, kind of like how I did with the bench, it's the same base texture for all of it. I just chose different modifiers and values for the level of rust. So we just threw a rust decal over this one. Same thing here for the hinges. and the handles. This one we actually threw 2 on there because I tried a couple different modifiers. I think this one came out looking the best. Then for the rings on the door handle, I tried to create a jade-like color almost, but I couldn't find any good jade textures out there, so I kinda had to improvise. So what I did was I took the bronze texture that I used on the sword handle, and I just overlaid them on top of each other, but I created a green image, sorry, and I did a grain merge on it to sort of colorize the bronze to make it look a little more faded, like it had been oxidized. Didn't really turn out exactly how I want it to, but I think for the time being, it'll work. It'll work. And then this is another texture I found. It is the amethyst texture. I just needed some kind of gem to go on the door handles to kind of cap it off. So all I did here really was I took the base, I created a copy of it, and what I did was I lowered the saturation on it. Then I overlaid it and just kind of lightened it up a bit to give it a look that it kind of whited and faded. And then I put a couple extra layers on it to just kind of darken it back up so I have these highlights, but everything else is still kind of as amethyst would be if you first pulled out of the ground, like just rock. It's very dark, it's not faded and cloudy yet. But yeah, that's basically just how I put all these textures together, just trying out different modifiers and playing around with the uh, intensity of them. Overall, I think I like how it turned out for the most part. I think it needs a bit more cleanup work down the road, but I think for the time being, it's serviceable. So, yep, that's it. Thank you.